My name is Mariana Rivera. I am 36 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the person my family calls when something breaks, when a bill comes due, or when an emergency requires cold, hard cash. Not because they respect me, not because they listen to me, not because they see me as someone worthy of gratitude. They call me because I am reliable, because I have always been the one who says yes, who fixes things quietly, who doesn't ask too many questions. The funny thing is, from the outside, my life looks almost enviable. I work as a financial consultant for a mid-sized firm downtown. The pay is solid, the benefits are decent, and 3 years ago, I bought a modest little house in the suburbs with a small yard and a perpetually dying herb garden. I share it with my partner, Eric, my college boyfriend, who somehow survived my worst years of overworking and people-pleasing, and our daughter, Frances. She's the kind of kid who laughs with her whole body and insists on sleeping with 3 different stuffed animals every night, so none of them feel left out. By most standards, my life is comfortable, stable, successful even. But comfort and success don't mean much when you grew up in a house where you were never quite enough, where your wins were met with a nod and a distracted, "That's nice, honey," while your siblings' smallest triumphs were celebrated like a national holiday. My younger sister, Aubrey, was born 3 years after me. I remember the day my mother brought her home from the hospital. Everyone kept saying how beautiful she was, how perfect. My mother told our relatives that Aubrey had a special light about her, something that made people love her instantly. She said it right in front of me, as though I were a dim lamp in the corner. My father would chuckle and say Aubrey was the daughter he'd always dreamed of, even though I was standing right there, the actual firstborn. I learned early on that my role in the family was to be steady, dependable, and quiet. Aubrey's role was to be adored, protected, and sacrificed for, no matter what that cost anyone else. It didn't start with big things. It almost never does. When I was 12 and Aubrey was 9, I decided I wanted a skateboard. Not a fancy one, just something that would let me glide down the cracked sidewalks of our neighborhood and feel, for a few seconds, like I was going somewhere. My parents said if I wanted one, I should save up, so I did. For 6 months, I hoarded every crumpled bill, every coin from babysitting 2 doors down, every extra bit of allowance. I kept the money in an old shoebox under my bed and counted it every night before falling asleep. The week I finally had enough, I came home from school and found the shoebox gone. In its place was a bicycle catalog open on the kitchen table. Aubrey was bouncing in her chair, chattering about which color she wanted. My parents had taken my savings, those months of scraped-together effort, and used it to buy her a bike. They told me I was being selfish when I asked about it. "Family shares everything, Mariana," my mother said, as though I'd broken some sacred rule. "Your sister needs this more than you do." Aubrey rode that bike for years. I watched from the front porch, barefoot on the splintered wood, feeling the shape of the absence where my skateboard should have been. By 16, I understood the roles better. I got a part-time job at a grocery store, stacking shelves and bagging groceries on weekends. I had plans. I wanted to save for a beat-up used car so I could drive myself to school, to work, maybe even out of that town one day. I worked through holidays, double shifts, exam weeks, telling myself it would be worth it when I had my own keys in my own hand. One evening, I came home to find my parents at the dining table with a spread of sequined fabrics and rhinestones. Aubrey had made it onto some regional dance showcase, and she needed new costumes. My mother told me they were proud of me for working so hard, and then asked if I could lend them the money I'd saved. "Just this once," my father added, not quite meeting my eyes. I wish I could say I refused. I wish I could tell you that 16-year-old me stood up for herself and said no. But I didn't. I transferred every dollar I had to my parents' account. They promised they'd pay me back. They never did. Aubrey sparkled under stage lights and costumes my teenage hands had paid for, while I walked to school in the rain because the car never materialized. When I graduated from high school, I did it with honors, third in my class and holding a scholarship to a state university like it was a golden ticket. The ceremony was small but important to me. I remember standing there in my borrowed gown, scanning the crowd for my parents. They clapped, they smiled, they hugged me afterward. And then, that same week, they threw a surprise party. Not for me, of course, for Aubrey. She had made the cheerleading squad, and apparently that deserved balloons, a cake, and a living room full of relatives. Her photos went up all over the fridge. My graduation certificate ended up in a drawer with old cables and manuals no one read. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I didn't stop trying. I just adjusted my expectations. I stopped waiting to be celebrated. I stopped expecting recognition. I started to wear my usefulness like armor. If I couldn't be adored, I could at least be needed. By the time I went off to college, I had internalized a simple equation. Aubrey was the heart of the family, and I was the backbone. She got the attention. I carried the weight. When I landed my first real job after graduation, working at the firm downtown, my parents called one evening. Their voices were soft and strained, full of carefully chosen pauses. The rent was due. They were short. Could I help just this once? I still remember the way my stomach clenched. Déjà vu wrapped in new numbers. I sent them money without hesitation. Of course I did. That single once stretched into months. Months blurred into years. Soon I was paying their utilities, electric, gas, water, internet, phone, every single month. To make it easier for them, I set up automatic payments. They never had to worry about due dates again. The electric company knew my card number better than my parents knew my daily life. They didn't bring it up at family gatherings. No one ever pulled me aside to say thank you. It was as if the bills paid themselves. And when Aubrey got married to a man who could barely hold a job, it was only natural in their eyes that I would co-sign her apartment lease. "You're good with money," my father said, as though that explained why my credit score should be tied to hers. A few years later, when the marriage imploded and Aubrey was left with 3 kids and a mess of debt, I did what I had been trained to do since childhood. I stepped in. I added her to one of my credit cards with a generous limit, set up a shared emergency account, and deposited money whenever she texted that the kids needed clothes, school supplies, or just a little help until next paycheck. The emergencies never stopped. The gratitude never started. Eric knew about some of it. Enough to worry, but not enough to see the whole picture. Every time he gently pushed for us to talk about budgets, I felt that old childhood tightness in my chest, the terror of being called selfish or ungrateful. So I hid the rest. I created a spreadsheet on my laptop, tucked away in a folder labeled something boring and official sounding, so no one would ever open it by accident. I logged every transfer, every bill paid, every temporary loan. Columns of dates and amounts stacked up like years on a life sentence. The total crept higher and higher until it slipped past numbers I could comfortably say out loud. Somewhere along the way, I crossed a line I hadn't even seen, from helping family into quietly funding a lifestyle. I told myself it was what good daughters did. Good daughters took care of their parents. Good sisters helped with the kids. Good women sacrificed without making anyone feel bad about it. Late at night, staring at the glow of my spreadsheet, I sometimes wondered whether I actually existed to them beyond the numbers. But I always shoved the thought away. You don't question the role you've been assigned when you've been playing it your entire life. At least I didn't, not yet. I didn't know it at the time, but all those years of silent giving were just dry kindling. The spark that would finally set everything on fire didn't come from a bill or a broken appliance. It arrived 2 days before my daughter's 7th birthday in the form of a single, casual message in the family group chat. A message that told me, in a dozen careless words, exactly where I stood. Frances turned 7 on a Saturday in June, the kind of day that looks like it was custom ordered from a catalog. The sky was a soft blue, the air warm but not suffocating, and the trees in our backyard were full and green, casting mottled shadows over the patchy grass. Months before the sun ever reached that specific angle, I had already been planning. Late at night, after Frances fell asleep tangled in her blankets and Eric dozed off with the TV still murmuring in the background, I would sit on the couch with my laptop and scroll through party inspiration. Unicorn themes, pastel balloons, candy tables that look like something out of a magazine. It sounds excessive, I know. But I wanted this for her, not because of the photos or the aesthetics, but because somewhere deep in my chest, there was a younger version of me who had never gotten a party that felt like she mattered. I couldn't go back and fix that for myself. but I could make sure my daughter never had to wonder if she was worth celebrating. Eric teased me, in a gentle way, whenever he caught me comparing cake designs. "You know she's going to be happy with anything that has sugar and glitter, right?" he'd say, leaning over my shoulder. I'd nudge him away, pretending to be annoyed, but he knew. He knew this wasn't just about a birthday. "I just want it to be special," I told him once, my voice softer than I intended. He kissed my temple and said, "Then it will be, because you're the one making it." We decided on a unicorn theme, a bounce house in the backyard, a custom cake from that bakery downtown everyone raved about, a face painter who could turn kids into butterflies and superheroes for an hour at a time. We invited 20 of Frances's classmates and a handful of neighbors with kids around her age. Every night, Frances would mark off another day on the wall calendar in the kitchen, the purple X's marching steadily toward the big circled date. 7 is a big number, she told me one morning, her hair sticking out wildly as she poured cereal. I won't be a little kid anymore. I laughed and told her she would always be my little kid, but part of me knew what she meant. 7 felt like a line. 3 weeks before the party, I opened the family group chat, the one with my parents and Aubrey, and typed out a long message. I listed the date, the time, our address, and mentioned there would be plenty of food for adults too. I even added a little note about how excited Frances was, how she talked about her grandparents and aunt coming to see her big girl party. My thumb hovered over the send button for a moment. Habit made me hesitate, as if I were asking for something too big. Then I took a breath and hit send. My mother replied first with a heart emoji and, "Of course, querida, wouldn't miss it." My father responded a few minutes later, "I'll check my schedule." He always had this way of making his present sound like a favor, something he bestowed when it suited him. Aubrey didn't answer at all. That wasn't unusual. She rarely responded to anything unless there was a question about money. I told myself silence meant yes. They had driven 2 hours before for Aubrey's kids' parties, for recitals and sports games, and even a school science fair. Surely they would manage 30 minutes for their only other grandchild. The week of the party, my brain split into 2 channels. During the day, I was at work, answering emails and talking through risk strategies and investment options. In the evenings, I was stuffing goodie bags, wiping down folding chairs, and arguing with myself about whether to add an extra table just in case more adults stayed. 2 days before the party, I sent a friendly reminder to the group chat, just confirming headcount for Saturday so we can make sure there's enough food. I added a smiley face, because I still believed that politeness could buy me consideration. My mother replied almost immediately, "We are looking forward to it. What should I bring?" It was the kind of response that sounds warm on paper, but I felt a flicker of unease anyway. My father stayed silent. Aubrey finally wrote back an hour later, "What time?" The time was clearly written in my earlier message. I repeated it anyway and told myself not to read into it. That night, after everyone went to bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting anxieties instead of sheep. The spreadsheet sat in my laptop a few feet away in my office, heavy as a confession. If I opened it, I knew it would swallow me in columns and totals, so I didn't. I tried to focus instead on Frances's round, excited face when she'd seen the picture of her cake mock-up earlier that afternoon. "It looks like magic," she'd breathed. That, I told myself, was why all of this was worth it. 2 days before the party, my father's message came in at 11:30 p.m. The room was dark, the only light a thin slice from the hallway nightlight and the glow of my phone screen on the nightstand. I wasn't fully asleep yet, more suspended in that hazy in-between where thoughts blur and the body feels weightless. The vibration buzzed against the wood, and instinct had my hand reaching for it before my mind caught up. I blinked at the screen, my eyes struggling to focus on the notification. It was from the family group chat. For a moment, I felt relieved. I assumed it was a confirmation. In a way, it was, just not the kind I expected. "We're not coming," my father had written. "Aubrey's kids have been having a hard time. We already promised to take them to the water park this weekend. They need us more right now. Frances will be fine. She's too young to remember anyway. You understand." There were no emojis, no softening punctuation, just those words, stacked on top of each other like a verdict. Aubrey's kids matter more. Frances will be fine, you understand. I read the message once, then again. Then a third time, as if repetition would change the meaning, make it less sharp. My chest felt hollow, as though someone had scooped out the air from inside me and replaced it with static. I could actually hear my pulse in my ears, a thick, muffled thudding that drowned out the quiet of the room. Next to me, Eric shifted in his sleep, oblivious to the way my world had just tilted on its axis. I stared at the word understand for a long time. It was the same word they had always used on me, a command dressed up as a compliment. You're so understanding, Mariana. You always understand. It sounded like praise, but what it really meant was, you won't make a fuss. You'll accept being hurt because you're used to it. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to write something cutting, something that would slice through decades of being overlooked. I wanted to ask how many water parks they'd skipped for my sake. I wanted to tell him that Francis stood at the window every time someone rang our doorbell, just in case it was them. But the words tangled in my throat, crowded by 36 years of habits. In the end, I typed just one word. Understood. I hit send, turned the phone face down on the nightstand, and lay there in the dark, eyes wide open. I didn't cry. The tears were there, pressing hotly at the backs of my eyes, but something colder and heavier settled over them. It felt like standing barefoot on ice, a numbness that wasn't quite absence, but something sharper hidden underneath. The morning of the party, the sun came up as if nothing had happened. Frances bounced into our bedroom before my alarm went off, climbing onto the bed with a shriek of, "It's my birthday! It's my birthday!" She didn't notice the stiffness in my smile or the way my voice caught when I told her happy birthday. Kids don't look for micro-expressions. They take what you give them at face value. Eric noticed, though. As we set up the last of the decorations in the backyard, he watched me struggle with a roll of tape longer than necessary. "You okay?" he asked quietly when Frances ran inside to check on her cake again. I nodded too quickly. "Just tired," I said. He looked like he wanted to push, then decided to let it go. "We're going to give her an amazing day," he said instead. "That's what matters." And in many ways, the day was amazing. The bounce house arrived and inflated into a bright, squeaky castle that filled half the yard. Kids shrieked and tumbled inside it for hours. Their laughter carried on the warm breeze. The face painter turned Frances into a unicorn princess with glitter on her cheeks and a rainbow crown carefully brushed across her forehead. Adults clustered around the snack table, sipping drinks, making small talk about school and work and the weather. Every time the gate creaked or a car door slammed out front, Frances's head would snap up. "Is that them?" she'd ask once, and my heart clenched. "Maybe more friends," I said, forcing lightness into my voice. After the third false alarm, she stopped asking, but I caught her glancing at the back door occasionally, the way you check if a door you know is locked might somehow open anyway. When we sang Happy Birthday, she beamed, eyes squeezed shut as she made a wish. For a second, I wondered if she was wishing they would walk through the door. The thought made my throat burn. I clapped and cheered louder than anyone to drown it out. It wasn't until evening, after the last of the folding chairs had been stacked, and the bounce house deflated into a sad, colorful puddle of vinyl, that the day's glitter finally settled into silence. The sun dipped low, turning the sky a hazy gold. Paper plates and half-empty juice boxes filled the trash bag in my hand. Frances sat at the kitchen table, sleepily picking at the remaining frosting on her plate. She looked up at me with heavy eyes and asked, in a small voice that sliced straight through my chest, "Mama, why didn't Grandma and Grandpa come? Did I do something wrong?" There it was, the question I had been trying all day to outrun. I set the trash bag down, wiped my hands on a towel, and sat beside her. Her cheeks were still faintly stained with face paint. She looked so hopeful, so vulnerable, staring at me like I held the key to this confusing puzzle. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said, taking her small, sticky hand in mine. "You hear me? Not one thing." "Then why didn't they come?" I swallowed. A dozen furious answers clamored in my mind. Because they decided other kids mattered more. Because they have always chosen favorites and I let them. Because they think you'll forget being hurt just because you're young. Instead, I took a breath and chose a softer truth. "They had something else they decided to do," I said carefully. "It doesn't mean they don't care about you. But Daddy and I, we're here, and we love you more than anything, okay?" She studied my face for a second, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. Children are heartbreakingly willing to accept half answers if they come wrapped in warmth. She hugged me, frosting and all, then yawned and shuffled off to find Eric. Later that night, when the house was finally quiet, I went into my office and closed the door. The room was lit only by the glow of my monitor as I woke up my laptop. My cursor hovered over the inconspicuous folder that hid my secret. I opened it, clicked on the spreadsheet, and watched as 10 years of my life loaded into neat rows and columns. Payments to utility companies, transfers to my parents, credit card expenses marked for Aubrey, deposits into the emergency account, dates, amounts, notes. I scrolled and scrolled, the list seemingly endless. Each line, on its own, could be justified. A bill here, a crisis there, a one-time favor. Taken together, it was something else. A pattern. A story of a woman slowly disappearing behind the needs of everyone else. My father's words flashed in my mind again. Aubrey's kids need us more. Frances will be fine. You understand. For years, I had believed that being a good daughter meant accepting that equation without protest, that I had to keep understanding, no matter how much it scraped at the inside of my chest. But as I sat there, the quiet hum of the computer fan filling the room, something in me shifted. The guilt that had always been my constant companion began to feel thinner, less powerful. Underneath it, something steadier emerged. Not anger exactly, though there was plenty of that, but clarity. I zoomed out on the spreadsheet and stared at the grand total in the corner. The number sat there, cold and undeniable. This was what my understanding had cost me. I thought of Frances asking if she'd done something wrong. I thought of her scanning the door for grandparents who had already decided she wouldn't remember their absence. I thought of the 12-year-old girl who'd never gotten her skateboard, the 16-year-old who'd handed over her car fund without a fight, the young woman whose graduation certificate had been forgotten in a drawer. I understand, I whispered into the empty room. But this time, it meant something different. I understood exactly what my family had turned me into, and I understood that if I didn't change something now, Frances might grow up learning the same twisted version of love. I closed my eyes, rested my fingers on the edge of the desk, and took a long, slow breath. When I opened them, the decision was already made. It was time to stop being the person they expected me to be. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Not because of an alarm, not because Frances climbed into our bed, but because something inside me refused to let me sleep. It wasn't anxiety this time. Not guilt or that familiar ache in my chest. It was something steadier, something almost quiet, a resolve that felt like it had been waiting years for me to finally wake up. The house was still. Eric snored softly, one arm flung across the empty space where I had been lying. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded down the hallway on cold floors to my office. Dawn hadn't yet crept into the sky. The windows were dark, mirrors of the dim room. I sat down at my desk, turned on my monitor, and opened the spreadsheet again. The glow of the screen illuminated the walls, the desk, my hands. It felt like a spotlight on the truth I had been avoiding for too long. 10 years. 10 years of transactions, excuses, emergencies, obligations, and guilt. 10 years of being the person who always understood. Not today. First, I logged into the utility account. Their address was still saved under my profile, my parents' apartment listed neatly beneath my own, like a reminder that I had been carrying two households all this time. The current month's bill had already been paid. Of course it had. I always paid early. I clicked through the settings, fingers steady in a way that surprised me. 3 clicks. That's all it took to delete the autopay that had been draining me month after month. 3 clicks to undo a decade of enabling. Deleting their address from my account took only seconds. The website confirmed the change with a cheery green checkmark. Next came the credit card. Aubrey and my mother had been authorized users for years, swiping without hesitation, texting me only when they needed an increase or when a charge didn't go through. I used to think saying no would make me cruel. Now I realized enabling them had only made me invisible. The representative on the phone was polite, chipper even. As she confirmed the removal of all supplementary cardholders, she read their names out loud, Aubrey Rivera, Teresa Rivera, and asked if I was certain. Yes, I said. My voice didn't waver. I'm sure. The moment she finished processing the request, a strange lightness washed through me. Not joy, not victory. Something like relief. As if someone had quietly lifted a weight I hadn't realized had been crushing my ribs. Then came the emergency account. An account with my name and Aubrey's name on it. a place where I had deposited money whenever she claimed the kids needed something urgently: shoes, backpacks, school fees, groceries, gas, shoes again, always shoes. The bank representative told me the balance, $462. Money I'd added just last month. I transferred every dollar into my personal account. I closed the emergency fund with the same finality someone might use to shut a door on a chapter that should have ended long ago. Finally, I called the property management company. Aubrey's Lease. I had co-signed it years ago because her credit was abysmal. Her marriage had ended, her bills piled up, and my parents insisted that family helps family. The woman at the management office sounded exhausted, but she answered my questions with practiced efficiency. She told me the process for removing myself as a guarantor: formal request, documentation, and a 60-day window for Aubrey to find a replacement. Just send the forms, I said. When the email arrived, I filled everything out immediately. I didn't hesitate. I didn't overthink. I didn't replay old conversations or visualize my mother crying or Aubrey accusing me of ruining her life. I simply did it. I hit submit. A second email confirmed receipt of the forms. By 9 a.m., I had taken back every financial tie they had ever wrapped around me. The invisible tether that had bound me to their crises, their irresponsibility, their entitlement, it was gone. I sat back in my chair, a hand resting over my chest. My heartbeat felt calm. I expected guilt. I expected shame. I expected the version of myself they raised. A girl who apologized for being an inconvenience even when she was the solution, to show up and demand I undo everything. She didn't. For once in my life, I felt like the adult version of myself had finally stepped into the room, closed the door behind her, and taken control. 3 days passed before the panic began. At first, my phone was silent. No texts, no calls, no "thank you for everything you've done, we're sorry for hurting Francis." Nothing. It was almost laughable how predictable it was. Silence when I was useful, noise only when I wasn't. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, someone knocked on my door, hard. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to answer. When I opened it, my mother stood on the porch. She looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her hair was unbrushed, her clothes rumpled, her eyes red and swollen. She held her purse to her chest like a lifeline. "Mariana," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you do this to us?" Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. I stepped aside and let her in. "Come inside." We sat at the kitchen table, me in my usual chair, her in the one she used to sit in when she visited Francis. The room felt smaller with her sorrow sitting between us. She told me the electric company had called. The auto pay was gone. The bill was delinquent. They were sending a disconnection notice. Aubrey's credit card had been declined at the grocery store. People had stared. She was humiliated. The bank told her the emergency account had been closed. She didn't know how to buy the kids' food this week. Her hands shook as she spoke. Tears dripped down her cheeks. I waited until she finished. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. I tapped her father's message, his declaration that Aubrey's kids mattered more and Francis wouldn't remember anyway. I turned the phone toward her. "Do you remember this?" I asked. She stared at the screen, eyes widening, her mouth opening and closing, like she was searching for the right excuse. After a long, breathless moment, she said, "Your father didn't mean it that way." "How did he mean it?" He just meant, you know Aubrey has had a hard time. Her kids need extra attention." "And my child doesn't?" I asked quietly. My mother's lips quivered. Her eyes fell to the table. Then she said the thing she always said when cornered, the thing that had kept me chained for most of my life. "You have always been the strong one. You understand." I felt something old and heavy inside me snap. "No," I said sharply, but not loudly. "Not anymore." She jerked her head up. I listed everything I had canceled. The utilities, the cards, the emergency account, the lease support. I told her I had been carrying them for 10 years. I told her the number, just a fraction of what the final total would be. Her face blanched. Then I said the words I had never said in my entire life. "I'm done." She burst into tears. Loud, desperate, guilt-stained sobs. "You're tearing the family apart. This isn't who you are, Mariana." "No," I corrected softly. "This isn't who you taught me to be." She froze. I stood and opened the front door. "You need to go home." Her sobs echoed as she walked down the steps, shoulders shaking. I didn't follow her. I didn't apologize. I didn't run after her the way I used to. The moment the door shut behind her, the silence in the house felt clean, honest. I went back to my office, opened the spreadsheet, and stared at the glow of numbers that finally made sense. Not as a record of guilt, but as a record of truth. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the villain in their story. I felt like the hero in my own. After my mother left, I stayed at the kitchen table for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint laughter of Frances drifting from the living room. It was such a normal sound, my daughter playing, the rhythm of a peaceful home, but it felt strange, almost unreal, layered over the emotional wreckage that had just spilled across my floor. Eventually, I went back into my office and opened the spreadsheet again. I thought I'd feel guilty seeing all the numbers laid out like that, rows and rows of validation that I had been the invisible backbone of my family for far too long. But guilt didn't come. What came instead was clarity. I realized then that this spreadsheet wasn't just a personal record anymore. It was a years-long diary of silence, an autopsy of every sacrifice I'd made in a language my parents seemed to understand. Numbers. And now that I was finally done paying for their comfort with my sanity, I needed them to see the truth they had spent years pretending wasn't there. So I started expanding it. I added color-coded categories. I added precise notes. I dug through old emails, bank archives, screenshots, digital receipts I'd saved without thinking. I organized every payment I'd made on their behalf into neat columns. And utilities, monthly payments across 10 years. Credit card charges, categorized by store and item type. Emergency account deposits, every crisis, every just this once. Lease-related costs, fees, deposits, background checks, guarantor renewals. Loans, dates and amounts, none ever repaid. Miscellaneous expenses, the small favors that accumulated into something massive. Every click, every entry, every highlight was a strange kind of therapy. I was assembling a story I had lived but never allowed myself to read. An hour passed, then two. By the time the afternoon sun had shifted across the floor and climbed the opposite wall, I had built a 47-page document, every line backed by receipts and confirmation numbers. When I finally totaled everything, the number stared back at me like a slap. Over $273,000. A house, an entire house. I leaned back, rubbed my hands over my face, and let that sink in. No wonder I had been so tired for so many years. No wonder my chest felt like it was always carrying something I couldn't see. This wasn't generosity. This wasn't kindness. This was exploitation wrapped in family language. This was a lifetime of being conditioned to give until I disappeared. I wasn't invisible because I was quiet. I was invisible because they never bothered to look. By the time the document was ready, my hands no longer shook, not with fear, not with guilt, but with purpose. For the first time in my life, I was going to send them something that said, I exist, whether you acknowledge it or not. I opened a new email and addressed it to my parents and Aubrey. I gave myself 30 seconds to think about what I wanted the message to say. Just 30 seconds, or I knew I would start softening it, making excuses, trying to spare feelings that had never spared mine. The email was short. 5 sentences, no anger, no theatrics, just truth. I told them the financial support they had received from me over the past 10 years was documented in the attached files. I explained that I had shouldered their utilities, credit cards, emergencies, and housing stability. I wrote that this support was ending permanently. I told them they would need to manage their own expenses from now on. I added that if our relationship was to continue in any capacity, it would have to be built on something other than financial dependence. I read it 3 times, not to soften it, just to make sure it said exactly what I meant. Then I clicked send. The email disappeared with a quiet swoosh, a tiny digital sound that felt more final than any slammed door or shouted argument could ever be. The first call came within 10 minutes. My father. I didn't answer. Then Aubrey. I didn't answer her either. Then my mother. Voicemail. 10 minutes after that, the group chat erupted. The thumbnail bubble flickered nonstop with new messages, the preview texts filling my notification bar so fast the phone struggled to keep up. They weren't even waiting for one another to respond. They were typing over each other, the way people do when they're panicking. The words spilled across my screen faster than I could read them. Then call us now. How could you do this? The power will be shut off. Aubrey's card got declined at the store. We needed that money. You blindsided us. We're family. You're punishing the kids. This is cruel. It was like watching people claw at a wall that had suddenly turned solid after years of being soft. They weren't talking to me, they were talking at me. Aubrey sent a long message accusing me of being jealous. Jealous? Of what exactly? She said she could be evicted because of me. She asked how I could let her kids suffer. She said I was petty, bitter, selfish. My mother accused me of abandoning them, of breaking the family, of turning my back on my responsibility. My father used words like disappointed and disrespectful, the same vocabulary he'd used whenever I dared to have boundaries as a teenager. I watched their messages stack on the screen like a growing avalanche. My phone buzzed until I finally switched it to silent and placed it face down on the desk. It buzzed anyway, vibrating across the wood like something alive. When Eric walked into my office, he took one look at me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Is this about the party?" he asked softly, and I nodded. "So, do you want to talk about it?" His voice wasn't insistent. It was gentle, safe. It gave me room. And so, for the first time in years, I told him everything. All of it. The utilities, the credit cards, the lease, the emergencies, the rounding errors that added up to tens of thousands, the hidden spreadsheet. He listened without interrupting, without judging, without a single, "Why didn't you tell me?" That would have made shame curl into my throat. When I finished, he sat back and took a long breath. Then he said, "Mariana, that's a lot. More than anyone should carry alone." My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. "What do you want to do now?" he asked quietly. And I didn't even have to think. "I want to keep going," I said. "I want to be done." He nodded. No resistance, no discomfort, only support. "Then I'm with you." He squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't standing alone at the edge of a collapse. When he left the office, I looked at my phone again, saw the messages still flooding in like frantic taps on the glass of a locked door, and turned it off completely. The silence that followed was the softest, most peaceful sound I'd heard in a decade. The fallout began slowly, like the first distant rumble of a storm. Then it hit with the force of a hurricane. For the first day or two, there was only silence. Loud, resentful silence from people who suddenly had no access to the resources they'd always taken for granted. Then, on day 3, the tone shifted from angry texts to outright desperation. On the 4th day, the power at my parents' apartment was shut off. I found out not because they told me, but because my mother called Eric's phone, my number still turned off, sobbing so hard her words blurred together. Eric looked at me, silently asking if he should hand me the phone. I nodded. The moment I put it to my ear, her voice cracked like thin glass. "Mariana, please, please, they cut the electricity. Your father needs the air conditioning. It's so hot. The food is spoiling. We don't know what to do." I didn't say anything at first. I just listened. There had been countless nights where they talked and I listened, fixing crises I didn't create. But this time, the silence wasn't obedience. It was power. Finally, I asked, with a calmness that surprised even me, "How much is the past due balance?" She sniffed, gulped for air. $340. A pause stretched between us. "Mom," I said quietly, "where did all the money go?" Silence. Not confusion, avoidance. She knew what I meant. 10 years of paid utilities, 10 years of support, no rent, no bills, no credit card payments coming out of their pockets, hundreds of thousands saved through my labor. I don't know what you want me to say," she whispered. "I want the truth," I said. "I want to know why you never asked how I was doing, why you never told me no, why it was always me who had to understand." Her voice cracked again. "You've always been the strong one, Mariana. You never complained." There it was, the refrain of my entire life, the excuse, the justification, the prison. "Mom," I said softly but firmly, "I didn't complain because I was scared. Because every time I said no, I became the problem. Because you taught me that being good meant disappearing." She choked on a sob. "Please, just pay this one, just to get us through." I closed my eyes. For a moment, the old reflex, the daughter who always saved them, stirred inside me. But then I remembered Frances's face at her birthday party, her little voice asking why her grandparents didn't come, the innocence in her eyes, too pure to understand favoritism. "No," I said gently but finally. "You have Aubrey. She and her children matter more, remember?" I heard her breath hitch. Not because she disagreed, because she finally heard her own cruelty echoed back. Family helps each other, she whispered. I did, I replied. For 10 years. I helped all of you. Now someone else can take a turn. Then, quietly, firmly, I ended the call. The silence afterward was so deep it felt physical. 2 days later, I received a letter from the property management company confirming that my name had officially been removed as Aubrey's guarantor. She now had 60 days to find someone else. I knew she wouldn't. Her credit was a disaster. Everyone knew it. That same afternoon, Aubrey sent a long, furious message to the group chat, pages and pages of blame that I didn't bother to read fully, just skimmed. You're making my kids homeless. You've always hated me. You're taking everything out on the wrong people. You've ruined my life. Not one sentence said, thank you for helping me for years. Not one sentence said, I'm sorry you ever had to. Not one sentence said anything about Francis. It was all about the loss of access to me, not the loss of me. My father's message came next, longer, more controlled, almost rehearsed. He apologized for the group chat message, for hurting Francis, for taking me for granted. He said he hadn't realized how much I had done. He said he wanted to fix things. He said he missed me. I read it slowly, waiting for the part where he would acknowledge the years of favoritism, the decades of minimizing my worth. Instead, the message ended with, you've made your point. Now please turn things back on so we can move forward. There it was, the truth. Even in apology, they weren't apologizing to me. They were apologizing to the version of me who still paid their bills. So I responded with the simplest, most honest answer I had. I acknowledge your apology, but the boundaries are staying. And then, without hesitation, I muted the group chat, permanently. The consequences softened into them slowly, like bruises blooming under skin. I didn't watch closely, but sometimes the fallout reached me through relatives or neighbors. Aubrey, unable to secure a new guarantor, had to move in with my parents. 5 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. Kids in one room. Aubrey on the couch. My father's pride shrank by the day. My parents had to borrow money from my aunt to pay bills. She asked too many questions about where all their money had gone. My parents stumbled through answers, and their relationship with her strained. My father had to sell his fishing boat, the one he bragged about for years but barely used. Cable TV, gone. Weekly dinners out, gone. Comfort, gone. None of it made me happy, but none of it made me feel guilty either. Because for once, their problems were theirs, not mine. During all this, I stayed where I had always been, but for the first time, I wasn't holding up the weight of 3 adults and 3 children. I was holding up only what was mine, my child, my partner, my life. Eric and I took Francis to the beach that month. We rented a little cottage with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was perfect. Francis ran into the waves with her arms wide open, laughing as salt water splashed her legs. She drew shapes in the sand with sticks. She collected seashells like treasures. And I breathed, truly breathed. At sunset, as Francis built a crooked sandcastle and Eric helped her pack sand into a bucket, I watched them and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom, not from responsibility. Freedom from being responsible for everyone but myself. Frances came running up to me, holding a lost piece of sea glass, her eyes bright. Mama, look, it's like a treasure. I smiled and tucked it into her bucket. It is a treasure, sweetheart. And as I stared out at the ocean, endless and shimmering, I realized something. I had traded an entire decade for people who didn't even notice I was drowning. But I wasn't drowning anymore. I was learning to float. Summer drifted into autumn, and with it came a quiet I had never known in my adult life. Not the uneasy quiet of waiting for the next crisis, not the tense quiet of holding my breath for another late-night plea from Aubrey or a guilt-laced message from my parents. This was a different quiet altogether, a peaceful one, a deserved one. Some days I would catch myself listening for the familiar ding of the group chat, muscle memory, expecting another demand, another emotion-fueled accusation. But the phone stayed still on the counter, screen dark, notifications muted. And every time I noticed that silence, something inside me relaxed, like a knot in my chest slowly untying. My mother still sent occasional holiday texts. Merry Christmas. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you're well. I replied with polite, brief responses. Nothing cruel, nothing inviting. Just neutral acknowledgments to messages that didn't ask anything of me for once. My father stopped messaging entirely. He had offered his apology, an apology more rooted in consequences than remorse, and when I didn't undo my boundaries, he retreated into silence. It was the closest thing to accountability I had ever gotten from him. Aubrey never apologized, not once. I stopped expecting her to. Some people can only see the world through the lens of their own needs. And for Aubrey, my boundary wasn't a boundary, it was a betrayal. Not because I'd wronged her, but because I'd stopped being useful. I accepted that, and I chose to move on. When Francis's 8th birthday approached the following year, there was no hesitating, no wondering whether to send a group chat reminder, no checking my phone to see if my parents were coming. I didn't even consider inviting them. The thought simply didn't appear in my mind, and that absence said more than their presence ever could have. The party planning was smoother this time, lighter. No anxious knots in my stomach, no desperate hope that my family would show up, no mental calculations about seating for adults who had repeatedly demonstrated they valued other children more than my own. Eric and I ordered another bounce house, this time a castle that made Frances scream with joy when she saw the picture online. I found another beautiful cake from a local bakery, its pastel frosting swirled into the shape of a unicorn's mane. Frances chose her own theme this year, Rainbow Warrior Princess, and wore a sparkly cape all day like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. The backyard filled with kids and neighbors and Eric's family, all of whom adored Frances in a way that felt effortless and sincere. She ran through the grass with her cape flying behind her like a comet tail, her laughter rising above the music and chatter. I stood on the patio with Eric, his arm wrapped around my waist, and watched our daughter glow in the middle of her own celebration. The way she should, the way I never did. "Look at her," he murmured, proud and soft. "I know," I whispered. I looked at Frances, cheeks flushed, hair messy, frosting on her chin, and felt a warmth bloom in my chest. Not the kind that makes you tear up, the kind that steadies you. The kind that tells you you made the right choices. Not inviting my parents didn't feel vindictive. It felt natural, healthy, peaceful. This party was for people who showed up when it mattered, people who supported my daughter, people who loved her without hesitation or comparison or conditions. I realized something, standing there in the golden afternoon sun, watching Frances run and laugh and live freely. Love isn't proven by blood. Love is proven by presence, by effort, by consistency, by choosing each other. For 36 years, I had been waiting to be chosen by a family who only chose me when they needed something. And when I finally stopped giving, they stopped pretending. Their absence at Frances's birthday wasn't a tragedy. It was the truth. Later that evening, after the kids left and the bounce house deflated into a soft, colorful heap across the lawn, Frances climbed into my lap with her sparkly cape wrapped around both of us. She was exhausted and glowing, her eyes half-lidded with sleep and sugar. "Was this the best birthday ever?" I asked. She nodded dramatically. "The best. I love everyone who came." I kissed the top of her head. "Me too." She paused, then said, "I didn't miss anyone." I felt something loosen deep in my chest, something I had carried for far too long. I hugged her tighter. "That's because everyone who mattered was here." She smiled, satisfied, and drifted into a soft sleep. I carried her inside and tucked her into bed, her cape still draped around her shoulders like a protective shield. Eric wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. For once, I didn't have to pretend. "I really am," I whispered. We stood there in the quiet of our home, not burdened by someone else's crises, and I finally felt whole. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is hushed and the world feels far away, I think about my parents. I wonder if they've learned anything. I wonder if my father regrets the message that broke everything open, the one that made me realize I had been living on the wrong side of loyalty my whole life. But wondering isn't the same as caring. I don't carry their weight anymore. I don't carry their expectations. I don't carry their needs above my own. I carry my daughter. I carry my partner. I carry myself. And none of that feels heavy. It feels right. My name is Mariana Rivera. I am 36 years old. I am the mother of a bright, joyful daughter. I am the partner of a man who stands with me, never on me. I am a woman who chose herself after decades of disappearing. And I am finally unapologetically free.